Laura Bennett realized someone had replaced her name on her own life on an April morning, when Austin was still covered in that pale golden light of Texas spring, warming quickly but still soft along the edge of the sky. And the glass door of bloom and table reflected her face back at her with such strangeness that, for one brief moment, she thought she was only exhausted after 3 straight weeks of running projects without rest. That door was still the same door she had wiped down hundreds of times with bargain store glass cleaner, still marked by the small scratch in the lower right corner from the first year she opened the studio, when she had dragged a farmhouse table that was far too heavy over the threshold, still hung with the little brass bell Rachel had given her on opening day, along with a handwritten card that said, "For the door you built yourself, and for every beautiful thing that will walk through it." Laura had kept that card in her desk drawer for years, like proof that not everything in her life had to be carried alone. That morning, when she pushed the door open, the scent of fresh flowers still drifted from the cold room in the back. Eucalyptus, garden roses, white orchids, candle wax, and old wood. And everything still looked like her studio, from the shelves of linen sorted by earthy pallets to the wall of wedding mood boards she had pinned up piece by piece with her own hands. But on the reception desk there was a new acrylic nameplate, clear and glossy, set beside a pale yellow vase of tulips that had not been there the night before. The words on it were printed in an elegant serif font, soft black, just formal enough to look like an approved decision rather than an intrusion. Rachel Moore, creative director and managing partner. Laura stopped in the entryway. Her hand was still holding the studio key, the metal key worn along the edges from 10 years of use. But in that moment, it suddenly felt weightless, like an object that no longer opened the room it was meant to open. She had never signed anything for that title, never agreed to it, never discussed it with a lawyer, an accountant, or the team. Rachel was her best friend, the woman she had once called her sister, the woman who had a key to the studio because Laura believed family did not stand outside the door, but Rachel was not managing partner. Laura's phone vibrated in the pocket of her cream linen jacket. A message from Evelyn Hart, the biggest client Bloom and Table had ever had, appeared on the screen. Rachel said all future approvals should go through her for now. "Hope you're taking the rest you need. You've built something lovely, Laura. Let them help you carry it." Rachel said all future approvals should go through her. "Hope you're taking the rest you need." Laura stared at the message until the words began to blur. Then the company email opened, sent to the entire team at 7:16 that morning from Rachel Moore. Subject line, "Temporary client flow adjustment." The body was written in a loving, gentle voice, without a single word ugly enough to strangle outright. As many of you know, Laura has carried an extraordinary amount for years. In this important growth moment, she will be stepping back from client-facing decisions for her well-being, while remaining the heart of Bloom and Table's creative legacy. Please route immediate approvals through me so we can protect Laura's vision and protect her energy. Laura would be stepping back from client-facing decisions for her well-being, while remaining the heart of Bloom and Table's creative legacy. Please send urgent approvals through me so we can protect Laura's vision and protect her energy. Protect. The word made Laura feel sick. She looked around the studio. Maya Ellis, her first design employee, stood near the fabric table, holding a stack of terracotta linen, her eyes sliding away before coming back with panic and shame. Grace Porter, the part-time accountant, sat in the corner office with her laptop open, lips pressed tight, like someone who had seen smoke for a long time but had not known how to call it a fire before the flames caught the curtains. A new intern was arranging candles on a shelf, her movements slowing when she saw Laura. No one said good morning in the normal way. No one asked, "Do you need coffee?" Bloom and Table, a place once loud with the sound of chairs being dragged, flowers being cut, printers running, and the tired laughter of people surviving wedding season, suddenly became a room full of people holding their breath in front of the very woman who had built it. Laura stepped forward and set her key on the reception desk beside the new acrylic nameplate. The sound of metal touching wood was very small, but in her head, it rang like something being locked from the inside. Rachel was not there yet, and the fact that Rachel was not there made it even more frightening. She had changed the room before she even needed to stand inside. 10 years earlier, Bloom and Table had no acrylic nameplate. No cold room, no boutique hotel client. No brides calling to ask whether a burnt peach palette would be too warm against sunset light. It began in the garage of Laura's rental house in East Austin, where summer grew so hot the roses wilted before she could finish stripping their thorns, where the old air conditioner rattled like a sick animal, and where she had to open the garage door at 4 in the morning to catch a little air before the day turned into an oven. Laura did not have a wealthy family to loan her money. Her mother had died early, and her father was a gentle man in the kind of way that did not know how to be present, always saying Laura could take care of herself, in a voice that sounded both proud and convenient. Her younger sister, Nora, 4 years behind her, had grown up in the same house, but in a different direction, angry at Laura because Laura was always leaving early, going to work, going to school, going to earn money, going to save herself, while Nora stayed behind with a father who grew quieter every year and bills that never paid themselves. Laura learned very young that if she did not take care of herself, no one would notice she needed care. Maybe that was why she became obsessed with beautiful things prepared for other people. Weddings, birthday dinners, long tables under strings of golden lights, linen napkins pressed flat, a flower placed exactly where it belonged. Those were the moments when people seemed chosen, seen, welcomed into a room someone had thought through for them in advance. Laura began by arranging flowers for an old coworker's engagement party, using her father's old truck, a truck that smelled of gasoline, dust, and cracked leather seats, to haul rented tables and chairs to a backyard full of dry grass. She painted wooden tables herself in the garage, taught herself to build a website through free videos, photographed her designs on her phone propped against a stack of books, and stayed up until 2 in the morning writing captions that described a dinner table as if it were the opening scene of a new life. The first weddings were not glamorous. One bride paid short because her aunt had gotten sick. One groom got drunk too early and knocked candle wax across the tablecloth. One Texas gust blew every guest place card away 10 minutes before seating. Laura ran, smiled, adjusted, apologized, saved. Mud stained the hem of her dress. Her hands were scratched from flower thorns. Her neck burned red in the sun. But when a bride stood beneath an arch of flowers and leaned into her father's shoulder, when the groom's mother cried because the memorial table for lost relatives had been placed exactly beneath the oak tree, when guests walked into an ordinary backyard and fell silent because it had suddenly become unforgettable, Laura felt something inside her stand up. Bloom and table was not a company at first. It was her quiet answer to every time life had failed to prepare a beautiful room for her. If no one was going to build Laura a room where she felt loved, she would learn to build rooms so beautiful that other people would remember they had been loved there. Rachel Moore entered Laura's life in college like someone who knew exactly how to make a lonely person feel, as though she had not been left outside the door. They met in the library during Thanksgiving break sophomore year, when the dorms were nearly empty, and Laura had stayed because she did not have enough money to fly home and did not really want to go back to a house where her father would sleep on the couch in front of the television, and Nora would look at her like someone who had abandoned the family by trying to live differently. Rachel appeared then with her brown hair tied high, an oversized coat, 2 coffees, and a warmth so forceful it almost felt like an attack. "You're Laura Bennett, right? You're in History of Design with me. Are you planning to sit here and pretend you're fine over the holiday?" Laura was so startled she only stared at her. Rachel set 1 coffee down in front of her. "My family is loud, there's too much food, and my mother believes anyone left on campus for Thanksgiving is proof that society is collapsing. Come with me." Laura had meant to say no. She was very good at refusing anything that might make her indebted. But Rachel did not wait for her agreement in the usual polite way. She gathered Laura's books for her, hooked her arm through Laura's, and pulled her out of the library as if they had been close for years. Rachel's house that night was full of voices: turkey, pie, scented candles, and cousins fighting over the television remote. Rachel's mother hugged Laura even though they had just met, called her sweetheart, and set out another plate for her without asking whether she deserved a place at the table. Rachel handed her a coat when she saw Laura shivering, and when Laura thanked her too many times, Rachel said, "Don't act like a guest. Your family now, family." The word entered Laura like water into cracked earth. Later, when Laura got food poisoning senior year and had to go to the emergency room at midnight, Rachel was the one who drove, sat on the plastic hospital chair, tied Laura's hair back when she vomited, and scolded the nurse for leaving her waiting too long. When Laura's father died of a quiet heart attack when she was 29, Rachel stood beside her at the funeral, not crying too much and taking up space, just holding Laura's hand through the whole service, then staying at Laura's apartment for 3 nights afterward, clearing away the food people brought, opening mail, reminding her to drink water. When Bloom and Table was still in the garage, Rachel brought tacos, coffee, Band-Aids, and sat on the floor with her folding menu cards until dawn. Rachel was not an employee. Rachel was the person who showed up when Laura's blood family did not know what to do with her pain. So when Rachel said she wanted to help Bloom and Table a little, once the company began to have too much work, Laura did not see a door to power opening. She only saw a sister standing in the doorway, rolling up her sleeves, saying, "You don't have to hold everything by yourself anymore." The seed of something worse had appeared very early, but at the time Laura did not know how to name it. It was during the first year Bloom and Table booked a wedding with real money behind it. Not a friend's backyard or a small party for someone she knew, but a wedding at a ranch outside Austin, with a bride who worked in advertising and a mother of the bride who kept saying, "Simple," while asking for everything to look like a magazine spread. Laura had stayed awake for 3 nights building the concept, using local wildflowers, cream tablecloths, tiny oil lamps, and a dessert table set beneath an oak tree. Rachel was helping for free then, running out for ice, cutting ribbon, reattaching place cards with hot glue. When the bride walked out and saw the completed space, she burst into tears and hugged Laura tightly in front of everyone. "You saw exactly what I meant," the bride said. "You made it more beautiful than I could explain." Laura blushed, exhausted and happy, unsure where to put her hands. Guests began asking for her name, a bridesmaid asked for a card, and the bride's mother told someone Laura has a gift. Laura did not notice Rachel standing behind the dessert table, holding a box of string lights, her smile stiffening for one very small beat. Only Nora, who had stopped by to help for a few hours and was standing nearby, saw it. Rachel smiled again the moment Laura turned toward her, calling out, "You did it, Elle," before hugging her in front of everyone. But a few minutes later, when the two of them were behind the truck, Rachel said in a joking voice, though her eyes were not quite joking, "Guess I'm just the invisible tape girl, huh?" Laura laughed and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "You're the reason everything didn't collapse." Rachel looked at her, but no one sees that reason. Laura heard the sentence as the sadness of an exhausted best friend. She said, "I see it." Rachel smiled, but the smile did not brighten. Later, Laura would remember that moment not because it proved Rachel had been bad from the beginning. People were rarely that simple. It only proved there had already been a seed in Rachel. A feeling of standing beside someone else's light for too long and beginning to believe she had a right to take part of that light because her hands had been burned too. Rachel's first acts of help were so small and reasonable that if anyone had called them dangerous, Laura probably would have thought they were being cruel. One June afternoon, when Laura was handling 3 phone calls at once, a supplier had sent peonies instead of garden roses. A bride was crying because her mother-in-law had added 12 extra guests, and Maya was waiting for approval on a mood board. Rachel sat at the side desk, watching the company inbox blink nonstop, and said, "Let me answer a few basic emails, just scheduling confirmations." Laura had the phone pinned between her shoulder and ear, her hands sticky with flower sap, and did not think much of it. "Fine, but don't quote prices." Rachel lifted both hands. "I won't touch the Queen's money," they laughed. Rachel answered, "Well, very well." She had a soft email voice, knew how to use a client's name, remembered personal details, and made people feel that Bloom and Table was not just providing flowers and chairs, but tending to a memory. "Hi, Caroline. Laura has been thinking about your grandmother's blue china and wants to make sure the linen doesn't compete with it." Laura read that line later and smiled because Rachel had remembered the bride's grandmother's blue china. Then Rachel suggested creating a shared email to keep Laura from getting overwhelmed. "Just to filter things," then a shared calendar, "just so I don't double book you," then the vendor list, "just so I can call on your behalf when you're on site," then access to the drive. "If you want me to find old proposals, I need to be in the folder." Every time it made sense. Every time it came with a real rescue. Rachel found a mechanic when Laura's truck broke down on the way to deliver chairs. Rachel found a cheaper candle supplier when the old shipment was destroyed in a warehouse fire. Rachel sat with a panicking bride long enough for Laura to rebuild a wind-bent floral arch. Maya was uneasy, especially when Rachel began signing emails as Rachel from Bloom and Table, and then Rachel, Bloom and Table Studio. But Laura only smiled. "Rachel is my family. If she wanted to scam me, she's had 10 years to steal the most maxed-out credit card I own." Maya did not laugh much. Family should still have a clear title when they work in the company. Laura thought that sounded cold, like dragging a contract into Thanksgiving dinner. Not everything needs paperwork, Maya. Later, that sentence would return to her like a thorn she had pushed into her own hand. Rachel did not only help. Rachel studied. At first, Laura thought it was the kind of attention she had always longed for. Rachel would sit beside her in the studio after everyone had gone home, under warm lights falling over the long table full of fabric samples, flower photos, candles, stones, wood, and glassware. She would ask, "Why did you choose ranunculus instead of garden roses for this bride?" Laura, tired but happy that someone wanted to understand, explained that the bride had a very soft face but feared anything too sweet. So ranunculus, with its thin petals, would create a fragile feeling without becoming overly romantic. Rachel nodded and wrote it down. "And this terracotta palette, why not a stronger brick red?" Laura talked about Texas sunlight after rain, damp earth, old adobe walls, and how too strong a color could turn a table into a concept instead of a memory. Rachel listened closely, her eyes warm, sometimes saying, "No one thinks like you." That line used to make Laura open up. Rachel read old proposals and asked how Laura named concepts. Wild honey after rain, saltgrass and candlelight, blue hour orchard. She learned how Laura did not sell services but sold feeling. She learned the phrases Laura often used. Low light, a table like a memory, luxury that does not need to shout, flowers that look freshly gathered rather than recently ordered. Laura did not keep secrets because she thought her art was not a formula anyone could copy. She believed someone could learn the words, but not take the way she saw. She was half right. Rachel did not need to take the soul immediately. She only needed to learn enough of the skin that outsiders would not realize the body underneath was not hers. One time, while Laura was sketching a table design for a bride who loved old gardens, Rachel took the pencil from her hand and joked, "Let me try speaking Laura. We're not decorating the table. We're making it look like this family has been sitting here for 3 generations." Laura laughed until her eyes watered because it sounded exactly like her. Rachel laughed too, then kept the paper. "I need to learn. One day you'll thank me for being able to speak Laura when you lose your voice." Laura did not know it was not a joke. The social framing began in front of clients, through gestures so small they almost vanished. In a meeting with a bride named Hannah, Laura was describing how wildflowers and cream linen could make her grandparents' backyard feel warm without feeling rustic. When Rachel stepped in, smiling at the client, "What Laura means is that we'll keep everything organic, but I'll make sure the timeline is tight enough that it never feels me's." See, Hannah nodded, visibly relieved. Laura nodded too, because it was true. That detail did need to be added. A week later, with another client, Rachel said, "Let me clarify the budget part because Laura is in the creative zone." Everyone laughed. Laura laughed along, a little embarrassed, because it sounded sweet, as if she were a charming artist who needed someone practical to bring her back to earth. Slowly, clients began looking at Rachel when they asked about deadlines, then when they asked about concept changes, then when they asked whether Laura would be okay with an adjustment. Rachel always answered by invoking Laura. "Laura will probably want to preserve the original story, but I think we can make this practical." Laura heard the words "probably," and "I think" more and more often. One night, when Laura asked why Caroline had sent a linen color change directly to Rachel without copying her, Rachel put a hand on her shoulder and smiled tiredly. "They know you're busy with the creative part. I'm just filtering some of it for you. Do you know how exhausted you'll be if everything hits you in the face?" Laura wanted to say she did not want everything to hit her in the face, but she also did not want decisions moving around her. But Rachel looked at her with the eyes of the woman who had sat in the emergency room, stood at the funeral, and brought tacos into the garage, and Laura could feel herself becoming smaller. "Fine, just tell me what matters." Rachel hugged her. "Of course, sister." The word had once been a roof. Now it was beginning to become a cloth throne over things Laura could no longer see clearly. Rachel entered Laura's private life the same way she entered the company, not by kicking down the door, but by being invited in and staying a little longer each time. She knew Laura's friend group because she had been there for years. Birthdays, small parties, end-of-wedding season dinners, weekend trips to a rented house near Lake Travis. Rachel remembered everyone's anniversaries, sent gifts on time, asked after one friend's mother, another friend's dog, someone else's IVF process. She became the person who organized the group chat, booked restaurants, reminded people Laura was deep in wedding season and should not be overwhelmed. At first, Laura was grateful. She really did forget birthdays during peak event season. Rachel helped her not become a terrible friend. But then there were dinners Laura only found out about later, through Instagram photos, where the entire group had met without her. When she asked, Rachel said, "Oh, we thought you needed sleep. You said this week you wanted to disappear from social life." "I said I was tired, not that I wanted to be left out." Rachel widened her eyes, genuinely hurt or very good at pretending. "I'm sorry, I really thought I was protecting you." Another time, Daniel Reed, Laura's boyfriend, an event photographer with brown eyes, a low voice, and the ability to make Laura laugh even when her back hurt from cutting flowers, began texting Rachel to ask whether Laura was at the studio because Laura was not answering her phone. Rachel answered, then Rachel asked if he was okay. Then Rachel became the person Daniel texted when he felt Laura disappearing into work. Laura did not know. Rachel knew how to speak to Daniel like someone worried for them both. "She loves you, I think, but Laura doesn't know how to stop. Don't let yourself get crushed inside her dream. I'm just afraid you think you can stand equal to Bloom and Table in her life. Don't tell Laura I said this. She'll think I betrayed her. I just don't want you hurt." Those statements were not entirely fabricated. Laura really did work too much. Laura really did cancel some dinners. Laura really did assume Daniel would understand, because he worked events too. That true part was what made Rachel's words more poisonous. Daniel began looking at Laura with a sadness that already had an explanation before she could speak. That wedding season, Rachel moved an important calendar reminder to the wrong day. It was the 2-year anniversary dinner for Laura and Daniel. Laura was at a wedding site, her phone dead, thinking the dinner was the next night because the company calendar showed it wrong. Daniel sat alone in the restaurant for nearly an hour. When Laura called, he did not yell. He only said, "I think I understand now." Rachel came to Laura's apartment that night, held her as she cried, and said Daniel did not deserve a woman building an entire world. Laura cried into Rachel's shoulder, not knowing that shoulder had just hidden the knife. The contract with Evelyn Hart arrived like the largest door Bloom and Table had ever stood before. Evelyn owned the Hart House boutique hotel chain, a woman in her 50s with cropped silver hair, thin-framed glasses, a calm voice, and eyes that looked through every advertisement to see whether the person in front of her was real. She wanted to create a premium wedding package for 3 new hotels in Texas Hill Country, not the kind of glossy white luxury with no soul, but something with local spirit and enough polish that New York guests don't feel like they've rented a barn. Rachel laughed when she heard that. Laura did not. She drove back to the studio, passing roads after rain, seeing the red earth darken, wet mesquite trees, wooden fences, sunset light falling over dry grass, and in her mind the concept formed. Long raw wood tables, pale terracotta linen, white flowers that were not too perfect, low candles in smoky glass, handmade ceramics, little rosemary, why sprigs tied into napkins, light like evening after the first rain of the season. She named the concept after the rain. The Table remembers. Maya almost cheered when she saw the sketch. This is Bloom and Table grown up. Rachel looked at it for a long time, quieter than usual. Beautiful, she said. Very Laura. In the meeting with Evelyn, Laura presented the emotional world of the concept, talking about how guests were not just coming to take wedding photos, but to feel as if they had stepped into a memory waiting for them. Rachel presented the logistics brilliantly. Timeline, vendor map, budget, backup flower options if the weather got too hot. Set up procedures across all 3 hotels. Evelyn liked both of them, but when she said, "Rachel, you have a very good way of bringing Laura's vision down to earth," Laura heard a small crack inside the compliment. After the meeting, Rachel linked arms with her in the elevator. "Without me, your ideas would just float up into the sky." Laura laughed because Rachel said it as a joke, but the sentence stayed with her, like a grain of sand in her shoe. Saying it out loud would make her seem petty. Keeping it quiet meant it began rubbing against skin. Maya found the renamed files late one night, while looking for the original proposal, so she could adjust the table sizes for Evelyn's second hotel. In the drive system, a new folder had appeared, Rachel Concepts. At first, Maya thought Rachel had simply organized something badly. Then she opened it. Inside were many of Laura's original proposals, copied over, some renamed, some with the creator metadata changed to Rachel Moore or Rachel B and T Studio. The file after the rain, the Table remembers, was there under a new name. Hart House Wedding Direction, Rachel Master. Maya sat frozen in front of the screen for a few seconds, heat risking in her neck. She took screenshots, checked the file history, and saw that Laura's original still existed in another folder. But some scanned handwritten notes had been separated out. She confronted Rachel the next morning in the sample room, where the newly delivered flowers were still in boxes. Rachel listened without panicking. She frowned slightly, like an adult facing an unfortunate misunderstanding. Maya, I was only reorganizing things, so they'd be easier to present to Evelyn. Rachel Concepts is an internal folder for the part I'm managing. Why did the metadata change? Probably because I downloaded the PDF again. Why is the file called Rachel Master? Rachel sighed and set down the flower shears. You're tense because this is a big project. I understand. Everyone is worried about their place as the company grows. That made Maya straighten. Don't do that. Do what? Turn a question about files into a psychological diagnosis of me. Rachel looked at her longer, her smile fading a little. Careful, Maya. Laura is already exhausted. If you take this kind of suspicion to her, you'll break her even more. Maya took it to her, but Rachel had already gone ahead. When Maya entered Laura's office, Laura had just heard that a bride was canceling because her mother was ill. Her eyes red from lack of sleep, pollen dust on her collar. Rachel said you're worried the company growing will change the design structure, Laura said, her voice tired. Maya went rigid. She already told you. Laura looked at the screenshots. She saw them, but because Rachel had called it organizing, because Maya might have been tense, because the Evelyn project was too big to turn into an internal war, Laura chose the soft solution. She sent an email reminding the team to standardize file naming and clearly mark concept creators, without blaming anyone. Rachel replied first, totally agree. We all want Laura protected and properly credited. Maya read that sentence and wanted to slam her phone onto the table. Grace Porter discovered the money being routed sideways, and because Grace was the quietest person in the studio, her discovery was frighteningly quiet at first, too. Grace was the part-time accountant, in her 40s, with short curly hair, reading glasses always slipping down her nose, a soft voice, and a habit of keeping every receipt as if preserving evidence for a world that liked to forget. She was reviewing vendor payments for the Hart House project when she noticed 3 strange transactions in the same week. The first was $18, $750 marked Premium Creative Consultation Retainer. The second was $7, $400 marked Vendor Alignment Fee. The third was $12, $300 marked Concept Expansion Preparation. All were paid by Evelyn Hart, LLC, but they had not gone through Bloom and Table the way every project payment should have. They had gone to a newly formed Delaware entity, registered to a commercial mailbox service, More Creative Consulting, LLC. Grace did not panic. She had done accounting long enough to know that the most frightening things were often given the dullest name. She emailed Rachel, asking what these fees were and why they were not part of Bloom and Table's main invoice. Rachel replied 12 minutes later. Temporary pass-through for advisory work Evelyn requested. Laura is aware. Please don't loop her into small financial clutter this week. Temporary pass-through for advisory work Evelyn requested. Laura knows. Do not drag her into small financial clutter this week. Grace stared at the word small, and then at the total amount of $38, $450. For Bloom and Table, that was not a small detail. It was a month and a half of payroll for the design and operations team. Grace dug further. In the revised Hart House contract draft Rachel had saved in the Evelyn revised folder, there was a clause on page 14. Section 6. 3. Premium Creative Strategy, Expansion Concepts, and Boutique Hospitality-Facing Design Direction may be routed through More Creative Consulting as an approved creative partner for future Hart House prop. Wise, Grace read the sentence 3 times. This was not just a strange fee. It was a bridge being built to move premium revenue and ideas out of Bloom and Table. That same day, Grace found an email Rachel had sent to a lighting vendor. Bloom and Table will eventually route premium creative through More Creative. For Hart House, please begin treating More as the creative approval point for elevated accounts, with Laura looped only where legacy context is needed. Legacy context, as if Laura were an archive, not a living founder. Grace emailed Laura, copying Rachel. That email never reached Laura because Rachel had been given permission to filter the shared inbox. Grace found the message sitting in archived mail, along with an automatic rule moving any emails containing More Creative Consulting, Premium Creative, Hart House Routing, and Laura looped out of the main inbox. Grace kept copies. She printed the invoices, the 3 clause, the vendor email, and the inbox rule log, placed them in a manila envelope, and kept it in her purse. But she did not hand it over immediately, because like many people around Rachel, Grace had been indirectly trained to fear that any evidence against Rachel would hurt Laura. Rachel had built a protected zone around herself out of the history of sisterhood. To suspect Rachel meant suspecting the woman who had stood beside Laura at the funeral, the woman who had brought food to the garage, the woman everyone called her sister. The most subtle betrayal does not only hide evidence. It makes the person holding the evidence feel cruel for speaking. Laura began being called overwhelmed. So often the word lost its original meaning and became a tight jacket everyone kept trying to put on her. Rachel told employees, "Don't send Laura small decisions. She's carried too much for too long." She told clients, "Laura is in a season where we need to protect her creative energy." She told vendors, "If Laura is slow to respond or a little sharp, don't take it personally. She's exhausted." She told Laura, "I just want you to rest." At first it sounded like love. Slowly it turned into a wall. One morning, Laura walked into a vendor meeting and discovered Rachel had approved changing the linen from soft terracotta to a deeper rust because the supplier was out of stock. Laura objected, saying rust would destroy the gentleness of the concept. Rachel smiled in front of the vendor. "This is why we love Laura. She feels every shade, but we have to balance that with a real deadline." The vendor nodded at Rachel. Laura felt herself being turned into a personality rather than the decision-maker. She said, "No, this isn't about feeling. We can change suppliers or reduce the number of tables using that shade." Rachel turned toward her, lowering her voice just enough to sound private while still remaining in the room. "Have you slept?" Laura went still. "Don't ask me that here." Rachel blinked as if wounded. "I'm just worried." The room's attention shifted from the linen color to Laura's mental state. She felt herself losing without understanding when the match had begun. That evening, Rachel came to her apartment with soup, exactly like she had years earlier, placed it on the kitchen counter, and opened the cabinet for a bowl without asking. She had a key to Laura's home. She knew which drawer held the spoons, where Laura hid dark chocolate, which sweater Laura wore when she was exhausted. "You're seeing everything as an attack," Rachel said gently. "Because everything is going around me." "No, because you've lived in fight mode for too long. You don't know what it feels like to be held up by someone else." Laura sat down, pressing a hand over her forehead. The sentence struck a truth. She really did not know. Rachel knelt in front of her and placed a hand on her knee. "I'm not taking anything from you. I'm just standing in the places where you're about to fall." Laura looked at the woman who had held her hand at her father's funeral, who had called her family when she had nowhere to go, and felt her anger dissolve into shame. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe she was too controlling. Maybe chosen family sometimes looked like losing control, because she was not used to being cared for. That night after Rachel left, Laura stood in the kitchen and looked at Rachel's spare key hanging beside the door. She thought about taking it back. Then she scolded herself for even thinking it. Family did not lose a key because of one difficult day. Nora saw what Laura did not want to see, because Nora had never been lulled to sleep by the legend of sisterhood. The relationship between the Bennett sisters had always been thorny. Nora believed Laura always chose outsiders before family, especially Rachel. Laura believed Nora only remembered the times Laura left, and not the fact that she had left to earn money, study, survive, build something that would not collapse along with the old house. One afternoon, Nora came to the studio to bring Laura a box of their father's old documents she had found while cleaning storage. Laura was out on site, so Nora waited inside. She saw Rachel sitting at Laura's desk, drinking from Laura's blue ceramic mug, the one with a small crack on the handle that Laura refused to throw away because she had bought it at the first fair where Bloom and Table had a booth. Rachel was on the phone with a client, her voice low and warm, using Laura's exact language. "We're not building an event. We're building the feeling that family has always been waiting there." Nora stood still. Rachel looked up, paused for a second, then smiled. Laura isn't back yet. She's overworking herself again." "That's my sister's mug." Rachel looked at the mug and laughed softly. "Oh, I just borrowed it. Things blur together here." Nora looked around. Laura's desk, Laura's mug, Laura's voice, Laura's clients. "No," Nora said, "only when someone is trying to blur them." When Laura came back, Nora pulled her outside into the parking lot, the late sun hitting both of their faces. "She isn't helping you anymore," Nora said. "She's trying your life on." Laura became angry immediately, because Nora had spoken directly into the place she was afraid to look. You don't know how Rachel has been there for me. I know. I've heard that sentence for 10 years. Rachel at the hospital. Rachel at the funeral. Rachel in the garage. Rachel is family. Do you think because I wasn't there the right way, I don't get to see when a woman is replacing your name on the door? Don't turn this into jealousy. Nora laughed sadly. You always do that. Anytime I talk about Rachel, you turn me into the jealous little sister. It's easier than asking why that woman has the key to your house, your calendar, your clients, your friend group, and now sits at your desk speaking in your voice. Laura looked away, but the sentence stayed. That night she opened her phone and looked at the group chat, where Rachel was the admin. She looked at her calendar, where Rachel had editing permission. She looked at her inbox and saw multiple client threads she was not in. She looked at the spare key by the door, and for the first time, she did not see a sister present everywhere. She saw a house where every room already had Rachel's fingerprints on the doorknob. The Hart House showcase was stolen before it even officially began. The rehearsal took place in a large greenhouse outside Austin, where Evelyn wanted to hold the partnership launch for premium clients, vendors, local press, and potential couples. The greenhouse had a high roof, old glass that wavered slightly, afternoon sunlight falling in golden strips across the stone floor. Long tables covered in pale terracotta linen, smoky glassware, low candles, white flowers placed not too evenly, rosemary sprigs tied into napkins. It was Laura's concept. Every corner carried her hand, the low placement of the flower vessels, so guests could see one another across the table. The mismatched ceramics that made everything feel like family. The slightly different chairs at the head table, as if they had been gathered from an old home. Laura walked in, and for a few seconds, despite the exhaustion, suspicion, and pain, she felt the pure joy of seeing something from inside her head become a real space. Then she saw the presentation materials set on the check-in table. Cover read, Hart House Wedding Showcase, Concept Direction by Rachel Moore. Laura picked up the page, feeling as though someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Rachel appeared beside her almost immediately, wearing a cream linen dress, her hair tied low, her face beautiful in a way that did not look like trying too hard. "Oh, that's a layout error," she said, taking the paper from Laura's hand gently but quickly. "I'll have it reprinted." Laura looked at her. "Why does the layout file have that name?" "Because the design team pulled it from the folder I'm managing." "Laura, don't do this here." "Do what?" Rachel glanced around. Evelyn was speaking with a journalist across the room. Staff were adjusting candles. Maya was watching from the flower table, her face tense. Rachel lowered her voice. "You're strained, and I understand. But if you explode in front of Evelyn today, you'll ruin what you built." That sentence silenced Laura. Rachel knew Laura would not break the scene in public. She knew this studio was Laura's blood. Knew Laura would swallow anger so the beautiful table would not be overturned in front of guests. During rehearsal, Evelyn raised a glass and thanked Rachel for the creative vision that has taken Hart House in such a distinct direction. Laura stood beside her, her face hot, her hand clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palm. Rachel tilted her head slightly toward Laura, her smile unchanged, as if to say, "See, you won't stop me here." And Laura, exactly as Rachel knew she would, stayed silent. That silence would later make Laura hate herself more than anything Rachel had done, because it was the moment she saw her name being peeled off her own work, and still stood still to protect the beautiful room. After the rehearsal, Rachel sent the stepping back email. This time it went not only to the team. Evelyn was copied. Major vendors were copied. A few VIP clients were copied. After a difficult but honest conversation, Laura has agreed she needs space from client-facing pressure, while she focuses on recovering her creative energy. "I'll be serving as temporary creative lead for Hart House and related accounts." Laura had never agreed. She read the email in her car, parked outside the greenhouse, her hands shaking. Rachel got into the passenger seat before Laura could lock the door, as if they were still two college girls escaping a noisy party. "I know you're angry. Get out of the car," Rachel began to cry. Not loudly, not messily, just enough tears to summon 10 years of history. "After everything I've done for you, do you really think I want to hurt you?" Laura looked at her, heart pounding. "You sent an email saying I agreed to step back." "I did not agree. You said you couldn't take it anymore. I said I was tired, and I heard you. That's what family does. They hear the part you're too scared to say. Don't use family to sign for me." Rachel cried harder, but her voice began hardening underneath the tears. "Do you know your problem, Laura? You want people to love you like family. But when they do the heavy work for you, you call it control. I answered emails while you slept. I held clients when you wanted to quit. I sat beside you when your father died. How many times did I pick you up? And now you look at me like a thief because I won't let the company collapse with your burnout. Every sentence was a needle attached to a real memory. Laura felt herself wanting to apologize, to say she was grateful, to say she was only afraid. That was the old mechanism. Rachel struck the debt of affection, and inside herself Laura nearly knelt. But then she looked through the windshield and saw the greenhouse outside. Her table, her concept, Rachel's name on the material. You helped me once, Laura said very slowly. That does not give you the right to become me. Rachel looked at her. Her tears stopped faster than Laura expected. For 1 second, her face went empty and cold. Then Rachel opened the car door. Be careful how you tell this story, she said before stepping out. Everyone knows who kept you standing all these years. For the first time, Rachel did not wrap the blade. Daniel returned with a piece of private evidence the next day, after hearing from an old vendor that Bloom and Table was transitioning creative lead, and Rachel had said Laura needed rest. He sent a short message. I think you finally need to see some things. Laura met him at a small cafe they used to visit after events, a place with dark wooden tables and windows facing a sun-dusted street. Daniel looked older than she remembered. Not much, only around the eyes. He placed his phone on the table and opened a folder of old screenshots. I didn't say anything before because I thought I was just trying to blame someone else after the breakup. But when I heard about Rachel, I realized it would be cowardly to keep holding this. Laura did not touch the phone right away. What did Rachel do? Daniel swallowed. She texted me a lot during our last wedding season together. At first, I thought she was helping me understand you. Later, I realized she had already decided what everything meant before you ever got to speak. The first message. Laura loves you, but she doesn't know how to choose anything that doesn't serve the business. The second. Don't tell her I said this, but she asked me to explain if she misses tonight. She can't handle emotional confrontation right now. The third, sent on the day of the missed anniversary dinner. She saw the reminder. She's choosing the event. I'm sorry. I don't think she knows how cruel that looks. Laura read each line. The cafe became very far away. I didn't see the reminder, she said, but her voice did not sound like her own. Daniel nodded, his eyes red. I know that now. Why didn't you ask me? He gave a painful little laugh. Because Rachel made me believe asking you would just force you to lie, so you wouldn't feel guilty. Because I wanted there to be a clear reason for why I was hurt. And because I was an idiot. Laura looked at him and had no anger left. This pain was deeper than the company. Rachel had not only taken clients, files, emails. She had once stood between Laura and the man she loved, speaking in the voice of a sister, translating absence into choice, translating exhaustion into cruelty, then holding Laura as she cried like the only one who had stayed. Daniel placed his hand on the table, not touching her. I'm sorry I didn't ask you directly. Laura looked at the messages and saw the past change meaning, like a house suddenly losing its wall. I cried on her shoulder, she said. The night you left. I cried on her shoulder. Daniel said nothing. There were no words enough. That night, Laura became the worst version of herself for almost 40 minutes. And later, she would be grateful that no one but herself, Nora, and the glow of her phone screen had witnessed. She went home, locked the door, drew the curtains, opened her laptop, and began saving every screenshot Daniel had sent. She created a long Instagram post with a 12-image carousel, beginning with the line, "The woman I called my sister ruined my relationship, stole my concept, and is trying to take my company." Her hands typed fast, her heart pounding like she was being hunted. She wanted everyone to know. She wanted the friend group to read what Rachel had sent Daniel. She wanted Evelyn to see who she was working with. She wanted Rachel to wake up in a room where no one believed her tears anymore. She added the photo Nora had taken of Rachel sitting at Laura's desk, the screenshot of the stepping back email, the cover page that said Concept Direction by Rachel Moore. She wrote sharp and ugly sentences because in that moment she wanted to hurt Rachel, not only expose the truth. Rachel didn't help me stand. She stood behind me long enough to measure when she could fit into my skin. She reread that line and felt a cold pleasure. Her finger hovered over post. Her phone vibrated. Nora was calling. Laura did not answer. Nora called again. On the third time, Laura picked up, nearly shouting, "What do you want?" Nora was quiet for one beat, then said, "Don't post." Laura went cold. "You don't know what I'm doing." "I know, because I want you to post it too. And that's exactly why you shouldn't." Laura looked at the screen. "She deserves it. Yes, but you don't need to give her the gift of proof that you're falling apart. You want me to stay calm so I can be believed. I want you to win in a way that doesn't let Rachel use your pain as evidence that she was right. Laura breathed hard. I hate that. I hate having to be clean when someone else got their hands dirty first. I know. Nora's voice softened in a rare way. But you don't have to be clean. You just have to be colder than her for one day. Laura looked back at the post. She had thought she would see truth there, but under the blue light of the laptop, she saw a part of herself wanting to burn the house down just to prove someone had started a fire. She saved the draft, then deleted it from Instagram. She did not delete it from her computer. She moved every image into a folder named Evidence, Not Fire. Then she sat on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, phone in her hand, crying because the part of her that wanted to destroy the showcase, expose Rachel, tear private life open for everyone to see, was still alive inside her. She was not noble. She had only stopped in time, and sometimes in time was all the dignity a person had left. The timeline of betrayal was built in the studio office after Laura changed the shared inbox password for the first time in 10 years, without telling Rachel. It was a small action, but her hand shook as she did it, as if she were betraying family instead of defending herself. Maya, Grace, Nora, and Daniel placed their evidence on the table one by one. These people were never supposed to be sitting together. Maya was the loyal designer who had once doubted her own eyes. Grace was the quiet accountant. Nora was the estranged sister. Daniel was the ex-boyfriend. Yet Rachel had touched each of them in a different way. And because of that, they became different rooms in the same invaded house. Maya brought the original files, metadata, and screenshots of the Rachel Concepts folder. Grace brought the more creative consulting invoices, the 3 clause in the Hart House contract, the vendor email saying Bloom and Table will eventually route premium creative through more creative, the automatic email archive rule, and the spreadsheet showing $38. $450 had moved outside Bloom and Table's official structure. Daniel brought the messages. Nora brought the photo she had taken of Rachel at Laura's desk using Laura's mug. Not major legal evidence, but a symbol that made Laura unable to breathe. Grace also had an email from a vendor. Rachel asked us to list her as founder-facing contact for Hart House billing. Founder-facing contact. Not Laura. Rachel. Studio camera footage from a late night showed Rachel entering Laura's office after hours, using her own key, opening the file cabinet, and photographing Laura's hand sketches. One vendor employee confirmed Rachel had requested quotes be sent directly to More Creative Consulting to avoid overwhelming Laura. An old friend group chat, surfaced through Daniel, showed Rachel organizing a birthday dinner without inviting Laura, saying, "She'll be relieved, honestly. She can't handle social obligations right now." Laura sat at the center of the table, staring at each piece, moving through psychological stages as if falling through floors. First came denial. Maybe Rachel really thought she was helping. Maybe the LLC was a mistake. Maybe the messages to Daniel were clumsy advice. Then self-justification. Rachel had been there when her father died. Rachel had saved her many times. No one betrayed with their entire self. Maybe ambition had simply slipped out of control. Then shame. Why hadn't she seen it? Why had Nora seen it? Why had Maya seen it? Why had Grace kept the envelope in her purse for an entire week? Because she was afraid of hurting Laura. Why had Laura given one person keys to everything, and then acted surprised when that person opened the doors? Then numbness. She sat still so long Maya had to place water in front of her. Finally came a delayed kind of resistance, not explosive, not heroic, just a hoarse sentence. "I don't want to do this at the showcase." Nora looked at her. "You still want to protect the room?" Laura closed her eyes. "It's my company." "No. Right now it's Rachel's stage unless you step onto it," Daniel said quietly. "She chose the showcase because she knew you wouldn't ruin the scene." Maya placed Laura's hand sketch on top of everything else. Pencil lines, color notes, a coffee stain in the corner. "Then don't ruin the scene. Just name it correctly." Laura looked at the sketch. After the rain, the table remembers. She wondered how many times a table had to remember someone else sitting down at it before its owner stood back up. Rachel fought back with sisterhood 2 days before the showcase. A long email went out to the shared friend group, a few close employees, and several collaborators. "I never wanted this to become public, but I'm worried about Laura." Rachel wrote that Laura was paranoid, burned out, turning against the one person who had always stood beside. She referenced the hospital, the funeral, the garage, The nights folding cards, the years of unpaid help. The times she had sacrificed her own opportunities for Bloom and Table. She did not say, Laura is crazy. She said, Laura is hurt. She did not say, I deserve control. She said, I kept the company from collapsing when Laura couldn't. Several friends texted Laura, what's going on? Rachel sounds really hurt. Another wrote, I know you're stressed, but Rachel really has always been there for you. Laura read the messages and felt herself being pulled back into old debt. Rachel really had been there. If Laura called Rachel a thief, what was she supposed to do with the girl who had pulled her out of the library on Thanksgiving? With the person who had held her hair in the emergency room? With the person who had stood beside her father's coffin? Truth did not give her cleanliness. Rachel was not a distant villain. Rachel was someone who had once loved Laura in some way, or at least had once needed Laura enough to call it love. And over the years, that need had turned into ownership. The night before the showcase, Laura went to the studio alone. She moved through each room, touching the wooden table, the fabric shelves, the flower shears, the boxes of place cards, the blue mug with the crack. She opened her drawer and found the old card Rachel had given her on opening day. For the door you built yourself. Laura reread it and cried, not because she wanted forgiveness, because part of the memory was still warm. And that warmth made the present more brutal. She placed the card in an envelope along with Rachel's old studio key, which she had taken back from the spare set after changing the temporary locks. She did not rip it. She did not burn it. Not yet. Some things had to be carried to the end of a story, so their weight could finally be understood. The official showcase took place in the Hart House greenhouse, on an afternoon so brilliantly golden that everything looked forgiven before it had been judged. White flowers in terracotta stretched across the table. The candles were not lit yet, but already smelled faintly of wax. Clients, vendors, local press, potential couples, the Bloom and Table team, and several Hart House employees moved between the tables with glasses of champagne in hand. Rachel stood near the front of the greenhouse in a champagne-colored dress, hair tied low, a small flower pinned at her chest that Laura recognized from the box of blooms she had chosen for the concept. The program sign read, Creative Direction Rachel Moore. Laura arrived neither late nor early, wearing a simple black linen suit, hair neatly tied back, laptop and folder in hand. Maya stood at the sound table, pale but steady. Grace sat near the back, her purse held tightly in her lap. Daniel stood beside a glass column with a camera, not as the event photographer, but so that if Rachel claimed Laura had caused a baseless scene, someone else would have recorded everything. Nora stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Rachel. Evelyn Hart approached Laura, her voice polite but careful. Laura, I hope you're well. Rachel said you were attending today only as an observer. Laura looked at her. Evelyn, before any agreement is signed, I need to clarify creative ownership and project governance. Evelyn hesitated. Rachel appeared beside them at once, her smile soft. Laura, not now. Laura turned to her. You chose now. Rachel smiled sadly, enough that a few people nearby looked at Laura as if she might be about to cause a scene. I know you're hurting, but please don't turn a beautiful day into. Into what? Laura asked. Into the truth. The air changed. Laura stepped toward the presentation area before Rachel could stop. She did not grab the microphone. She did not shout. She connected her laptop to the large screen, just as Maya had prepared. The first slide appeared, Laura's hand sketch, dated 6 weeks earlier with Laura's handwritten note. After the rain, the table remembers. Laura said, this is the original concept I created for Hart House. This is the file metadata before it was copied into a folder called Rachel Concepts. The second slide, Rachel Master. The third, Edit History. Rachel laughed, tears already in her eyes. Laura, you're humiliating yourself and humiliating me in front of clients. Laura did not look at her. This is the email Grace sent me about more creative consulting, an email that was automatically archived out of the shared inbox. Next slide. Invoices, LLC, total amount, $38,450. Next slide, section 6. 3 in the revised Hart House contract, allowing premium creative strategy to be routed through more creative consulting as a future creative partner. Evelyn Hart removed her glasses. Her face no longer held polite social caution. Rachel stepped forward. That was a preliminary discussion clause, never signed, and Laura is making it sound like. Laura advanced to the next slide. The email Rachel had sent the lighting vendor. Bloom and Table will eventually route premium creative through more creative. For Hart House, please begin treating more as the creative approval point for elevated accounts, with Laura looped only where legacy context is needed. The room went completely silent. Laura said, "Legacy contact. That is what Rachel called me inside the company I built." Rachel looked around, her voice beginning to tremble with something half calculated, half real. "I was trying to protect you from pressure. You're interpreting everything through pain." Laura continued. Next slide. The messages Rachel had sent Daniel. The silence deepened. Daniel looked down. Rachel went pale for the first time. "Private life has nothing to do with this." Laura turned toward her. "You walked into my private life first. You spoke for me to the man I loved and then held me when he left." Next slide. The Laura will be stepping back, email sent without Laura's agreement. Next slide. Security footage of Rachel entering Laura's office after hours and photographing the sketch. Next slide. Messages in the friend group where Rachel said Laura could not handle social obligation. Every room Rachel had kept separate was placed together on one table. Work, money, clients, love, friends, keys. Rachel tried to cry, her voice breaking in exactly the right measure. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. I'm your family." Laura looked at her. This was the sentence she had feared most. And when it came, it did not kill her the way she had thought it would. It only made her cold. "Sisterhood is not a key that lets you walk into my life and replace my name on the door." Rachel opened her mouth, but for the first time there was no sentence soft enough to cover her. Evelyn Hart stood very straight. "I want all of these materials sent to my lawyer before we continue any agreement." A few vendors stepped away from Rachel. A young Bloom and Table employee cried silently. Maya covered her mouth with one hand. Grace lowered her head, as if she could finally breathe. Rachel looked around and understood the room no longer fully belonged to her narrative. Then she looked at Laura, and what Laura saw in her eyes was not only guilt. There was hatred, too, the hatred of someone removed from a stage she had spent a very long time preparing to stand on. "You'll regret this," Rachel said quietly away from the microphone. Laura heard hers. "I already do," she replied, "just not because of today." The truth stood up, but it did not embrace Laura. Evelyn did not sign the separate agreement with Rachel. Harthouse paused the partnership that same day, and 3 days later Laura sat in the office of Alma Price, the intellectual property attorney Evelyn had recommended, across from Evelyn, Maya, Grace, and a Harthouse lawyer. Alma was a black woman in her 50s, her hair neatly braided, thin gold glasses on her face, her voice low, and no habit of softening reality. She placed the revised Harthouse contract on the table and opened it to Section 6(3). "This clause is not only ambiguous," Alma said. "It creates a route to move premium creative exploitation out of Bloom and Table and into more creative consulting for future projects." If it had been signed, Rachel could have argued that Harthouse had approved more as an independent creative partner, and then she could have used derivative concepts from Laura's proposal under the language of expansion. Evelyn looked at Laura, her face tense. "I did not approve that clause with this meaning." Alma nodded. "And because it has not been formally signed, we shut it down before it becomes a road." She laid out 3 documents. The first was a cease and desist letter to Rachel and More Creative Consulting, demanding that they stop using, presenting, selling, transferring, or developing any concept derived from the Harthouse proposal or Bloom and Table's creative property. The second was a notice to all Harthouse vendors stating that only Bloom and Table, through Laura Bennett or someone Laura authorized in writing, had the right to approve creative work, payments, and use of concept material. The third was an intellectual property reservation and financial audit request, requiring More Creative to return or preserve the $38, $450 pending investigation. Grace exhaled very softly. Evelyn said, "I'll also send an internal notice to the entire Harthouse chain. More Creative is not to be treated as a partner, subcontractor, or approved vendor on any of our accounts." Laura listened to every sentence, feeling as though windows in a house had finally been opened after months without air. But there was no clean relief. Alma looked at her. "I need you to understand this, Laura. The victory today is not that she was embarrassed at the showcase. The victory is that she cannot use your property to build her exit route. We are going to freeze every legal pathway she intended to use." Freeze. The word fit Rachel better than any rage could have. Rachel had traveled through the false warmth of sisterhood. Now she was being stopped by cold paper. Rachel lost the Harthouse opportunity, was barred from contacting vendors, was required to return the money she was holding. And a few weeks later, Laura, Grace, and Alma filed legal demands related to diverted funds, use of intellectual property, interference with contracts, and unauthorized access to company documents. Some employees apologized to Laura. Some meant it. Some apologized because they could see which side had won. Maya cried in the studio one evening and said, "I saw the files and still let you call it a misunderstanding." Laura could not blame her cleanly. "Nothing was clean like that. I saw things too." Daniel said he was sorry he had not asked her directly years ago. Nora brought Laura coffee and said, "I hate Rachel, but I also hate that I was right." Laura laughed very briefly, then cried right after because the sentence sounded too much like real life. The shared friend group broke into pieces. Some stood with Laura after seeing the evidence. Some said Rachel was wrong, but Laura should not have done it in public. Some stayed silent, and that silence was a choice too. Rachel sent one final long email to Laura, without an apology. She wrote that she had sacrificed her youth for Bloom and Table, that Laura had never known how to appreciate it, that without Rachel, Laura would have collapsed years ago, that Laura used people and then discarded them. Laura read the email once. She did not answer, not because she was strong, because she knew that if she stepped into that room again, Rachel would build another crooked mirror and call it the truth. The most painful thing was not that Rachel had been exposed. The most painful thing was that after Rachel left, the studio did not instantly feel like Laura's again. Every corner held her shadow: the reception desk, where the acrylic nameplate had stood, the chair Rachel used in the meeting room, the blue mug she had once used, the faint smell of her perfume in the coat closet. Laura won with evidence, but still had to walk through her own company like walking through a house after a burglary, where everything is still there but nothing feels untouched. Months later, Bloom and Table was smaller. Some clients had left because of the scandal. Some vendors kept their distance to see how things settled. Hart House returned, but with a tight contract and none of the original excitement. Laura changed the studio locks, changed the email system, revoked all access, and hired Alma to draft clear policies on concept authorship, project roles, client approvals, and finances. Every new proposal carried a concept creator line and a separate file history. Maya became official design lead through a contract, not through affection. Grace's hours were increased, and she had the authority to report any unusual transaction directly to Laura. Nora stopped by the studio sometimes, still difficult, still saying things that hurt, but staying long enough to help Laura sort through old boxes. Daniel did not return as a lover. Life did not give that part back neatly. He and Laura had one final coffee, where they talked about what had been lost without trying to turn pain into opportunity. He said, "I used to think you chose work over me. Now I know part of the story was written for us." Laura looked at him. "But I really was absent too." He nodded. Yeah, they did not hold each other for long. They made no promises. There were things Rachel had broken, but there were also things that had already been cracked, and adults could not pour everything onto the villain just to become clean. Rachel was sued, lost many connections. More creative consulting was locked out of every account related to Hart House, and part of the money had to be returned after a preliminary legal settlement. But Laura did not feel the satisfaction she had imagined. There were nights when she still remembered Rachel in the garage, hair tied messily, hands sticky with glue from menu cards, mouth full of tacos, saying, "One day you'll have a real studio, and I'll stand at the door and make everyone compliment you." That memory did not disappear because Rachel had betrayed her. It only became sharper. That was the real cruelty of loss. You do not only lose the betrayer, you lose the person who once saved you before they became the person you had to stop. One early morning, Laura arrived at the studio before everyone else. Austin was quiet, and the glass door of Bloom and Table reflected the pale sky. She wiped the door herself, like she had in the beginning, not because there was no one else to do it, but because her hands needed to remember what it felt like to touch something that belonged to her without passing through someone else. The acrylic nameplate with Rachel's name was gone from the reception desk. In its place was a small vase of flowers, nothing elaborate, a few white cosmos stems and rosemary arranged slightly off-center. In her office, Laura opened the old cardboard box Nora had found in storage. Inside were the things she did not yet know whether to keep or throw away. A photo of Laura and Rachel in the garage during that first year, both of them sitting on the floor amid wedding cards, laughing with exhausted, sweaty faces. Rachel's old studio key, the opening day card, a strip of terracotta linen from the Hart House concept, printed stepping back email, the hand sketch that had been scanned and saved in the legal file, a copy of Section 6, 3 with more creative consulting crossed through in red by Alma, And the Instagram draft Laura had never posted, printed only to remind herself that she too had once wanted to burn everything down. Lyra held the photo for a long time. In it, Rachel did not look like someone who would one day steal her life. Or maybe Laura had not yet known how to look. She did not tear the photo. She did not burn it. She placed it in the box with the old key, closed the lid, labeled it in her own handwriting. Old keys. Not Rachel, not betrayal, not family, just old keys. Keys that had once opened places they no longer had the right to open. She put the box in the cabinet beneath her desk, locked it, and stood up. When the employees arrived, the studio began to fill with the sound of shears. Flowers being placed in buckets, the printer running, Maya arguing with a vendor, Grace asking about invoices. Bloom and Table lived, but it was not the same. Neither was Laura. She no longer said, "Rachel is my family," with a soft smile. She no longer handed out passwords, because she was afraid of hurting someone's feelings. She no longer let the word family replace a contract. It did not make her happier, it only made her more awake. And wakefulness can be so cold that a person remembers how warm her skin used to be before she knew the door had been copped. That afternoon, when a new client walked into the studio and said the place felt beautiful, like a home, Laura smiled, polite. Real enough but not fully open. "Thank you," she said. "We had to change the locks a few times to keep it that way." The client did not fully understand and only smiled. Laura did not explain. Some stories do not need to be told to everyone who walks through the door. The owner of the room only needs to remember. And Laura remembered. She remembered very clearly that the woman she had called her sister had not taken everything with one loud explosion. Rachel had taken it by holding a key, walking into each room, relabeling each drawer, telling people Laura needed rest, then standing under the lights in Laura's voice. The truth had restored Laura's name to the door, but it did not return the person who had once stood beside her at that door. Laura lived on. Bloom and Table lived on. But from then on, every time she heard someone say, "Your family," a part of her no longer softened. It stood up very quietly and went to check the locks.